On behalf of Lewis Academy Now and the Thomas Jefferson Alumni Action Group, or TJAG, thank you for joining us and welcome to the See It, Be It speaker series. Lewis Academy Now and TJAG are thrilled to present this programming together as two organizations striving towards equity in education here in Fairfax County and beyond. TJAG is a group of more than 1,000 TJ alumni that seek to enhance accessibility, inclusion, and innovation within STEM education in order to develop well-rounded and ethical 21st century leaders. As alumni,
Esther, I think we've lost your sound.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
You're good. You're good.
Sorry about that. Okay. TJAG is a group of more than 1,000 TJ alumni that seek to enhance accessibility, inclusion, and innovation within STEM education in order to develop well-rounded and ethical 21st century leaders. As alumni, TJAG seeks an admissions policy at TJHSST that promotes student representation reflecting its draw districts and creates an improved anti-racist student experience that provides the quality educational experience needed to grow future STEM leaders. Lewis Academy Now is an organization recently formed to make sure that Fairfax County Public Schools brings an Academy for Government, Public Policy, and Human Rights to John R. Lewis High School in Springfield, Virginia. FCPS academies are centers within high schools that offer specialized courses that combine academic and career preparation. The Lewis Academy would be a nonpartisan program designed to develop student awareness of the processes of change through various forms of federal, state, and local government. Many of you are here tonight because you signed a petition in support of this academy. For that, I would like to thank you. But enough about us. Let's get this series started. A bit of housekeeping. We will be recording tonight's discussion, and though our audience won't be visible, your questions will be recorded. So without further ado, please welcome Makia Little, co-chair of the See It, Be It speaker series and the president of TJAG.
Thank you so much, Esther. It has been a great few weeks, almost a month of planning and soliciting speakers for this speaker series to help motivate and inspire our students at John Lewis High School and throughout Northern Virginia. And we are most pleased that our first speaker of the series is none other than Sean Perryman, who also was the former NAACP Fairfax president and is a current candidate for lieutenant governor in the Commonwealth. What better way to kick this series off? Sean, we were going to open up the series with a formal introduction, but I figure, we're going to be talking, so we might as well just jump right into it. So can you tell us a little about where you grew up, how you grew up, and how those experiences shaped how you view the world today?
Sure, and thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be the first speaker in what I'm sure will be an illustrative series here. I'm very excited to be here. I grew up, I was born in Brooklyn, New York, from Crown Heights, Brooklyn originally. My family first moved to Virginia when I was around 6 years old. Started elementary school here. We actually moved to Prince William County, and I was I went to Mullen Elementary. So that was my elementary school. We moved back to New York at some point. So I grew up between Virginia and New York. And, it really did influence how I look at things, how I go about things. Part of the reason we moved to Virginia was for better schools. The school system in New York, my mom was worried about, me getting in trouble or anything like that. And so it always struck me, why would we have to move out of state to find a better school? And so that was always something that was planted in my head. My family was working class. I often share that I'm the first person in my family to go to college, let alone go to law school. And so this was something where I saw the power of if you have the systems in place that can help students and help kids, how far they can go. Because I was just lucky, like I said, to come to Virginia where they had good schools. By the time I came back to New York, I was able to go to some specialized schools there. And that really gave me an advantage in my life. So I knew the importance of education. But so often people are locked into whatever's available in their zip code. And that isn't right. That isn't fair. That's something that we actually have to work on as a society, because too often we are determining people's destiny before they're even born. So that this is something that has greatly influenced my life in so many ways. But happy to get into any part of my upbringing and anything else. But I'm so happy to be with the students and with all of you. It's amazing that you took the name change and created this academy. This is exactly what John Lewis was speaking of when he says democracy is not a state, it's an act. And it's all of us are taking part in that and doing our part to make our community, the beloved community, better.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Since our audience are, middle school, high schoolers that may be considering, what their future is going to look like, what were some of your favorite subjects in school? And when you were in high school, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, no. Well, in school, some of my favorite subjects early on was always literature or English class. I loved reading works of fiction and getting insight on people. And, I think it's James Baldwin, and I don't know the exact quote, but he says something like, you think you're alone in your feelings and the way you feel about the world until you read the works of others. And then you kind of get this insight that you're not alone, that there's these complex feelings that we all experience and all are going through. So English class was always a good one for me. And then I loved, we called it, I think it was current events, was it in elementary school or middle school, where you kind of knew what was going on from day to day. That was kind of my insight into the news. As I got older, though, it was history and politics, understanding the events that happened 100, 200 years ago still had influence on today's current affairs. And so that has been something I've enjoyed, even now, learning about things that happened so long ago and how the influence of that still reverberates in today in our policies and the way we go about things, even if we don't know the origins of them. So enjoyed all of that. But when I was a kid, it was always literature and getting to read a good book and be transported somewhere else and getting to see that other people had the same thoughts and feelings that we did, and even if they were experiencing them at different times.
And what did you want to be?
Oh, I thought I got past it. In high school, I really didn't have a clue of what I wanted to be. Early on, I was everything from, one day this is a true story. I wanted to write for professional wrestling. I was like, I could be a writer for the WWE. And that was one of my childhood dreams, was to do that. And then as I got older, it was really something, because I hadn't gone, like I said, I hadn't had anyone in my family who had gone to college. And so I was in high school when I was at a pretty prestigious high school, and everyone was kind of thinking about the next steps. And I really wasn't sure what that looked like. I didn't have the insight on that. And so I don't think I've even told anyone this, but when I was in high school, I was so worried about college that I went out and got a real estate license. I took the evening courses when I was like a senior to get a real estate license, because I was like, if this fails, I want to do something else and have something to fall back on. So I think at the end of the day, what I wanted to be was successful, but I didn't know what success looked like for someone like me. I didn't have that path. I didn't really know lawyers or doctors or anybody like that. So to me, I wanted to be a success in some way. And so I remember senior year, I went and got a real estate license. I never used it, but it was in case college just wasn't for me.
Thank you for sharing those personal stories with us. So that actually takes me to my next question, which was, how did you choose a major in your college?
Yeah. So I was lucky enough when I went to college. I went to school at City University of New York, which was in Baruch College in Manhattan. It was known for its business program. And again, it was one of those things where I wanted to do something practical, didn't want to go into basket weaving or anything like that. And my mom said, don't go there and waste your own money, because I paid my way to go through college myself. And so it was one of those things where I had to really consider what I wanted to do. And I chose business because I thought that would be practical. But around the time of my sophomore year, I went to study abroad, and I went to Florence, Italy. And it was beautiful. And it was something, you know, I had gotten to travel a little bit just because my parents had worked for the airlines. But it was my first time traveling alone. And I got to look at all this history and politics, and all the history of Italy is so rich. And I sort of came to a realization on a walk that I have no interest in business. I was just doing it because it was a practical, at least a practical major. So I came back and immediately declared for political science. And that's ultimately what I got my degree in, and did a double minor in American Studies and Communication. And it was the best decision I ever made. When I was in high school, in college, I interned with the mayor's office, Mayor Bloomberg at the time, in his Office of Immigrant Affairs, interned with the UN, and then, which were amazing experiences, and much better than I probably did better at those than I would have at any business internship, because I really didn't have the inclination for it. So I would encourage any of young people listening to this to really follow what you are interested in, not what you think you should be or what others tell you, but really what interests you, because that is what will take you the furthest if you have a passion for something. And that's what ultimately worked out for me.
Awesome. Like, this is following along my questions very well. What experiences would you say from your childhood or your educational journey made you want to pursue law school?
So I used to commute from Brooklyn to the Bronx. I don't know if anyone knows how far that is, but in high school, my school was in the Bronx, and it was about an hour and a half commute. And I would take the train there every day. So at some point along that journey, I took up reading the New York Times, and I would read the newspaper about what was going on, mostly to pass the time. But I would come across these people who were making these very important decisions. And I was just curious, because having come from where I came from in Brooklyn, if a stop sign was put up, I didn't really have any insight on how that happened. I didn't know who was making the change in my community. And to see these people making this change that would have the effects on thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, that was something that was interesting to me. And so what I would do is then look up the person and see what did they do for their educational background. And so often they were lawyers. They had a JD. And that was really the first time I became interested in law, because in my mind, a lawyer at that time, at least, you know, you go to court, you sue people, it's Matlock, it's the folks you see on TV. But here were these people having so much impact on our society that were lawyers. And that's when I started to really research the degree and see, you know, what was this about and how could I achieve something like that.
Okay, I just want to tell the audience, I did not share all of these questions with Sean in advance, but this is like right in line with what you just said. What made you want to help lead and advocate for the renaming of Robert E. Lee High School to John R. Lewis High School?
We have such a good rapport here. This is great. We should interview each other each week. Well, with the renaming of Robert E. Lee, it started with it. You know, Jeb Stuart was renamed first, and when I joined my NAACP chapter in Fairfax County, they were already in the midst of the Jeb Stuart renaming, and you know, I'm going to be completely candid during these interviews. You know, I was always someone who was like, these renamings, what difference does it make? You know, like it's a terrible name, but who cares? That was sort of my approach to it when I first joined the NAACP. I didn't like the names, but it was just like, oh, we can do other things, you know. What changed my mind was when I got involved with NAACP and I went to those school board meetings and I saw the hateful people that were supporting that name and the rhetoric that they were using, not only about the name, but it was the way they talked about the students and the way they talked about students of color. Then when I started getting involved with advocating towards the school board, if you can't agree that the folks who broke away from our country they broke away of our country solely to start a nation that kept people enslaved. That was the reason for the Confederacy. If you couldn't agree that it's abhorrent to name a school after them, then you can't agree that we need to make changes to our hiring practices in our high schools. You can't agree. You can't get those same people to agree to equity is an important part of our society. So it was something like the naming, that the symbolic, the naming, it allowed this sort of ignorance and this sort of, I like the status quo, so I'm never going to change anything. And so that's when I knew we had to change it. That was such a necessary first step. And so I got involved with the Jeb Stuart name change, spoke out. That was my first time speaking publicly in the community was about Jeb Stuart. And I gave a speech, and a lot of people approached me after about that. And then we got that name change, but it was like, pulling teeth. And so when I became, at that point, I was education chair, and I think I was maybe going on to be vice president. And I said, I want to take on Robert E. Lee name change, but I want to do it myself. I want to do it in my way. And so I started this advocacy campaign of how we were going to go about doing it and the systemic steps that we were going to take to make that happen. And it was a bit of a one-man campaign at first because I didn't want too many people involved, because what I noticed with the Jeb Stuart thing is when you had too many people involved, it activated the other side. So I wanted this to be something that was kind of a slow creep that would creep up on them, and then the change was happening. And so that was my approach to it. But it was one, seeing that allowing these names allowed this sort of ignorance in our community. But two, I didn't want my daughter to grow up in a community where there was a Robert E. Lee and Jeb Stuart High School. We know what that was about. And if this is a community where we value diversity, those names had to go.
Awesome. And perhaps this is where we actually kind of vibe. We share an influence from Elijah Cummings. Although I only met him once and was inspired for a lifetime, you actually worked alongside him. So what was it like to work with Elijah Cummings, and how did he influence you in your engagement style and your leadership style?
That's a great question. I'm glad that I'm here with you because you met him once and you know what that impact was from just meeting him once. I didn't work in his personal office. I worked on the oversight committee. So we were working together for the hearings, but he was just larger than life. He really had this sense of presence, viewed with a sense of purpose. And I share the story all the time. I went to interview with him after several interviews with the committee, and I sat down, was right offside the House floor. I had prepared, had done all this work. I was ready to interview. And this man looked me in the eye and said, what feeds your soul? That was the only question he asked the whole interview. And he told me, he said, if you got through all those interviews, you're smart enough to be here. You seem like a smart guy, but I need to know what feeds your soul. That was what he was looking for people he hired. And I think, as far as how I engaged, that sense of purpose, like, what are we trying to really do here? What is the purpose of what we're doing here ultimately? As far as leadership style, he led by example. He worked very, very hard. In his last days, of course, he was very sick, and a lot of us didn't even know that. And he worked to the bitter end because he had that sense of purpose, and because he was willing to put in the work. I think everyone who worked around him knew that you had to give 100%. You couldn't watch someone like this working the way he was, even through sickness, and not give that much effort. So, and then the other thing was, attention to detail, getting everything that you can control right. And so got to work alongside him and do that. Now, he's better than me in a lot of ways. He was very close friends with a lot of his Republican colleagues, very far-right Republicans and conservative Republicans, and he was friends with them. And the thing he said to me that stuck in my head was that, we don't seek common ground, we seek higher ground. And he was going to bring you to that higher ground with him. And that was really remarkable. Someone who I would try to model myself after. but I'm a little bit more petty than that. Sometimes I can't, I try my best. But, I just really admired his sense of purpose and that drive. And that's what I'm hoping to bring to this campaign. That's what I'm hoping to bring to all my endeavors as I go out in the world.
Definitely on that higher ground. And I tell people this all the time, because when I graduated from Thomas Jefferson, I wanted nothing to do with TJ after I left. But one of the things that Elijah Cummings said to me was that we who've benefited from an education, it's on us to grab a hold of an issue and run with it. And so that stuck with me. And I always tell people, he didn't call me out, he called me up.
That's right.
So now you were president of NAACP Fairfax.
That's right, I was.
Can you tell us a little about the organization and why you decided to become president of Virginia's largest chapter, and why you're now pursuing a career in politics?
Sure. Well, the organization itself has been around for 102 years. It has a real legacy. We were born out of the Falls Church NAACP, and then it eventually was consolidated into one, but we trace our history to that Falls Church branch. Edwin Henderson is in the community. He's a great historian of the legacy of that NAACP chapter, as well as just understanding the legacy of Black history here in Fairfax County. And at the time, it was considered too dangerous to open a chapter in Fairfax. This was a rural community here. And when they petitioned to the national chapter to get the permission to open a local chapter, they were sure that they would be killed. This would not be someplace that you could safely open an NAACP. But they went ahead and did this, and there was a lot of land disputes that were related to that origins. But I didn't go into the NAACP thinking I'd be the president. I really came to the NAACP as someone who was frustrated and wanted to do something, just do anything in my community. And I sort of went in with that attitude that, tell me what you need me to do and I'll do it. And I found in that not only a platform and a microphone, but I found a more sense of myself, that I was tied to this organization and I was tied to a group of people. We had an amazing team there, from Kofi Annan, our former president, Nikki, Sujatha Hampton, who we worked together. And some of these folks I brought in, and some of them brought me in. But we were really together and had this, again, the sense of purpose of what we wanted our community to look like. We wanted it to be more fair, more equitable. And then how were we going to go about doing that? You mentioned it was the largest chapter. We've probably always been one of the larger ones, but we really grew it to the largest one under my leadership. We were around a little bit under 400 members when I took over. When I left, I think we had 1,400, something in that neighborhood. And that was after a year and a half. And we went there, and we're bringing in people everywhere I went. When I saw the most spike in membership is when I went on the news and I told people, you don't have to be a lawyer, a doctor, you can be a carpenter, a graphic designer. We need you at the NAACP. Because that is the truth of it. When we talk about civil rights and the movement and the coalition that we are building, it's going to take all types. We have to have everyone there who is steering in the same direction, but everyone's going to bring different skill sets. And I try to the best of my ability, bring in those people. But when we grew the membership like that, when we had that army of folks, we were able to accomplish even more, because it wasn't one person staying up all night writing a letter and this person. We had the team together trying to accomplish this goal, and everyone adding their bits of skills and assets that they have to help us get to where we needed to go. And, I think with any movement that you're building, any kind of coalition you're building, you want to start there, but you just need the people that are dedicated. And for those that don't know, some people think that NAACP is a job. This is a volunteer organization. We all have positions out of this. We have families outside of this. So I tried to value people for, if you're volunteering for me, I know you don't have to. You're not getting paid anything. There's nothing you get from it, but the sense of gratitude from me, and also the simple sense of accomplishment when we change something that needed to be changed. And so we try to keep that in mind as well. And, I wouldn't let anyone come to my organization and abuse my volunteers. And so I think it was that respect and everything else that helped grow the organization and helped us become the powerhouse that we are in Northern Virginia.
So with everything being so peachy, why politics now?
Well, it was peachy in the NAACP. It's not peachy in society. You know, I swear to you, yeah, you came to me, what's today, February 26th of last year. I had a lot of vacations planned. I was going to be traveling. I was going to do a lot of things, but then the coronavirus hit. And when it happened, there was so much suffering in the community. There were so many people who were out of work, so much uncertainty, didn't know what was going to happen next. I tried to do my part as NAACP president. One of the first things I did was call a meeting for our leadership team. And I said, we're going to figure out this virtual thing. We're going to figure it out pretty fast. We're going to have all our meetings on Zoom. And we did that. And we were able to really amass even more members through the virtual outreach. But I also said, we're not going to raise a single dime for ourselves. We're going to help this community. And we fed frontline workers. We started saving small businesses. We just really got out there and did the community work. But what I saw through that process was that the federal government had abandoned so many people. We know that there was a failure at the federal government level. People couldn't get CARES Act loans. People didn't know how to get testing. We all know the mess that was. But I also saw failure from a lot of our state leaders. Obviously, they were dealt a bad hand. But if we look at what happened last year, the things that happened before the pandemic with George Floyd's murder and the calls on the street for change, and then we look at the state Senate where they killed paid sick leave, killed ending qualified immunity, died because of some delegates and also because of some senators, Democratic senators, Democratic delegates. And I just sat there. I think I was sitting on my couch and I said, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep advocating to these people who don't understand what systemic racism is, who don't understand that people need good jobs and they need things to change, that they're so wedded to the status quo that, you know, all the advocacy in the world, I'd be the best advocate in the world, I'm not going to change their minds. I have to get there and be in a position where I can push for that change myself. And so that's what led me to running for office. We formally entered this race in October. And, you know, I'm not a politician, but I'm someone who understands policy and I understand building movements. And so that's what we've been trying to do across Virginia. And I think we've been doing pretty well of it. So we're going to keep going at it, but we are trying to fight on the issues. We're trying to be the most substantive campaign out there and really reach people where they are.
Thank you for that answer. And it's clear that you've worn many hats in the past few years. And so we're going to have a diverse array of speakers a part of this conversation. So if you had to choose one hat you most identify with, would you say community organizer, activist, or representative?
Wow. I usually try to break out of the frame of a question. I'll say I reject all of those. I would say I would call myself an advocate above all else. If I look at my career and what I've done professionally and personally, I've always been advocating for something, either people or change or something in between, whether it's a lawyer or anything else. And I think with that, the reason I say advocate is because when you're advocating for someone, sometimes you got to be a bit of an activist, sometimes you got to be a bit of an organizer, sometimes you're representing them, but you have to have different toolboxes that you bring to each campaign that you're going on, each issue that you're trying to tackle. Some of them is going to be behind closed doors, some of them is going to be very public and loud. And so I try to not be locked into one way of being or one skill set. I try to go and approach it in different ways, and depending on what I think will be the best way, the most effective way to effectuate the change I want. So I think above all else, I would say advocate. Even in law school, I was advocating for changing laws related to human trafficking. And I don't know if I would have looked at myself that way, but as I look back in hindsight, I see myself always being an advocate.
Well, as a mother of three, my kids definitely had the inside track tonight. So before we get to the real serious questions from the audience, I have to ask on behalf of my daughter, how much do you get paid to be a politician, in this case, lieutenant governor, if you are elected? And if it's not that much, why do you want to be a politician? And how will you eat?
So that's a great question. And everyone should know this because you got to know what's going on in your thing. No one is running for lieutenant governor to become rich. The lieutenant governor position pays a grand total, I think, and it could be maybe $1,000 one way or the other. I think it's $34,000. And if you're a delegate, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $14,000 to $15,000. Now, our delegation, our state senate is part-time, so that's you should have a job outside of that, and I will definitely need a job outside of that one, but it pays $34,000. I'm going here, like I said, this is to me, this is our moment. We don't have much more time, whether it's the climate crisis, whether it's folks trying to figure out what are they doing post-COVID. This is our time. And so I'm coming here trying to respond to the moment we are in. And that's why I'm running. I could go home and watch some TV and do that. And some days I do feel like doing that with this campaign. Sometimes I say, why did I do this again? But it's really the people I've met and feeling that I can in some way help or inspire someone else. That's why I jumped in this campaign.
And probably the most important question of the night, who made the hiring decision surrounding Sir Quincy Jones?
So for those that don't know, we have a new campaign dog. It's a dog named Quincy Jones, which is great. He belongs to my political director, L'Allegro Smith. L'Allegro and I decided to get a dog, and we saw him, and he is, if you follow me on Twitter at Sean Perryman VA, is truly the most adorable puppy you've ever seen. And so it was an easy hire. He's easy, also easy on the paycheck, small dog. So we try to do our best, but don't forget to give to the campaign because Quincy needs to get paid too. So, but yeah, you got to see Quincy. It's really the cutest puppy I've ever seen.
Yeah, there's actually been, I think, a run on puppies since the pandemic, and my husband keeps telling me no, but I'm going for a French bulldog. My kids in the background screaming now. All right, first question from the audience. Audience member says, first, thank you for sharing your experience and for being an example for our community. Can you describe the first time you saw or experienced the distinction between something being legal versus illegal versus something being just?
I'm not sure if I understand the question, but I'll try. I think they're asking me when I saw something be legal, but maybe not just. Maybe that's the way I'm interpreting the question. But tell me if I got that wrong. I'll be happy to answer.
I'll roll with yours.
Yeah, I explained that when I grew up in New York during the time of stop and frisk, which later on was found to be unconstitutional, but was believed to be a legal policy. And I described that in one of my Twitter and Facebook posts that had went viral about a year ago when Mayor Bloomberg was running for office. And that was something, whether it was legal or not, it was definitely unjust. It's something like 9 in 10 Black men were stopped in New York City, and they wouldn't find anything on them. It was just these needless stops. It was living in a police state. And so much of our history, we sort of dance around what the reality of the situation is. Stop and frisk was, a police state in New York City that was targeting men of color. And so that was something, even though now found to be unconstitutional, that was legal, but to me was as wrong as could be. And I couldn't understand how anyone who witnessed these stops or lived in New York where you were under the threat of harassment at any time from an officer of the state could allow that to happen. And so this was a policy that had great impression on me on how we do police and how we do public safety and the way our criminal justice system works.
Thank you. And I know there's been a lot of Interesting conversation about that from even our current president. The next question, thanks again, Sean, for being here. What inspires the most hope for you in these trying times?
I think the most hope in these trying times, it's really seeing people. I think last summer was really inspiring to me, the hope that people can come together around a cause and care about each other that much. But I think the other thing that I find it inspiring is that people are continuing on even under these difficult circumstances. We know how difficult it is for our students, for our parents, for everyone. But people are soldiering on. They're still caring about each other. They still have a sense of humor. We're still on Twitter. We're still creating art. It's that sense that the human spirit is so resilient, and that regardless of what's going on around us, we are still continuing on. In some ways, I feel like we have to be a little bit more realistic about how dire things are. But at the same time, I'm inspired by our resiliency during this period, our willingness to continue on and care for each other and try to be the best that we can be at our jobs, whether or not the circumstances you feel like being that way, people are still going out there and doing their best.
Awesome. Our students want to know, what can a teen do to make a difference in the face of injustice? What can we do for the next election if we aren't old enough to vote?
Absolutely. So if you will be 18 by the time of the election, you can still register to vote now. So that's something you should know. If you're 17, but you will be 18, please register, vote, and exercise your right to vote. What can a teen do? Look at history. A teen is often the folks that are the biggest inspiration and get the most done. Whether we're talking about teens and kids and everything else, whether we're talking about Fred Hampton, who I've seen a movie about recently. He was only 21 years old when he was murdered. We look at some of the people here. Barbara Rose Johns, who is one of the people that Justice High School is named after. These are young people who are making a difference in their community. And so a teen can do as much as an adult can do, and sometimes even more, because you have the sort of clarity that you're not jaded by the world yet, that you can see the things that need to change and sometimes be the voice for that change. So I would absolutely encourage you to always get involved, always do the right thing, and don't feel lesser than anyone. Too often people are dismissed because they're younger, but too much positive change has come from young folks to do something like that. So please get involved.
And one of the things that I definitely want to add about Barbara Johns is similar to how John R. Lewis replaced the name on Robert E. Lee High School. Barbara Johns replaced the statue in Capitol Hill of Robert E. Lee. So Barbara Johns is definitely someone I would recommend everyone on this call research if you don't know her story. She was one of the most profound teenagers in Virginia's history. As a follow-up to that question, how can teens get involved in political campaigns?
Sure. There's not a chat here for me to put it in, I don't think so. If you want to, you can go to perrymanforvirginia.com. We have a Get Involved page. We're always looking for interns. Right now, we have a lot right now, but there will be more roles available. Campaigns are a great way for teenagers to get involved in the political experience, and it's one way that you can rise fast if you do great work. So usually during normal times, there's more to do as far as knocking doors and that sort of thing. But we still need interns. We still need people to do research. So yeah, you can join one of the campaigns. I'd love to have you on mine. I'd love to have you be a part of what we're trying to build here in Virginia.
All right, I'm going to try to break this question down, but describing the role of the lieutenant governor, is that role able to make Virginia's General Assembly more functional? Is it like, what kind of influence does the lieutenant governor have on the Virginia Assembly?
Yeah, so I have to explain, because most people are like, what does the lieutenant governor even do? So Virginia is one of the few places where lieutenant governor and the governor run separately. So, but the lieutenant governor isn't an inherently powerful position. Under the Constitution, it breaks ties. You preside over the Senate, and that can be the end of your power. But I look at it like this: the NAACP president wasn't an inherently powerful position. It's what you make of it. And as one of 3 statewide elected officials, you're not only a leader for the state, you're a leader for your party. And what I'm hoping to do with this is to be the person who influences policies and be the person who says, we can't keep doing this the way we used to do it just because we came from some agrarian farming society. We shouldn't still be meeting just 4 weeks out of the year and thinking we're going to solve some complex state's problems. We have to get serious about what we need to actually do the job effectively. So the lieutenant governor won't be able to flip a switch and change the General Assembly and make it more functional. But I think the number one, well, there's 2 things. One, I think they can be a voice for the progressive policies that we need to adopt and the changes that we need to make systemically here in Virginia. And then 2, it could be a voice in your party for what are the values you stand for. Someone mentioned raising the minimum wage, paid sick leave. These are things that we need to decide. Is the Democratic Party for this? Is the Republican Party? Where do we stand? And so I look at that as the opportunity for the lieutenant governor to get involved in those conversations and lead on those conversations in ways that we haven't done before. You asked why I ran for lieutenant governor, I think earlier. As an advocate, I had been pushing for a couple years now for ending the death penalty and legalizing cannabis. Here in Virginia, we're finally on the precipice of doing both of those things. And when I look at it, it was because of the advocates, but also because statewide elected officials finally said that they were persuaded and that they would support these efforts. And it was that move that made it happen. That was the final wall that had to come down. But if you had a statewide elected official who was an advocate, who understood the importance of this and was pushing as hard as they could, I think we would have to have these conversations. And we would see real change sooner rather than later.
Awesome. We have a question about your time in New York. How did going to Bronx Sci affect your idea of possible careers for people who look like you?
Yeah, so I went to the Bronx High School of Science, which is not dissimilar from Thomas Jefferson High School in the sense that it's a specialized school. And, I think it did 2 things. It was weird in a way. One, I felt a bit out of place. A lot of the kids who went there, their parents went to Ivy League schools, and they were always sort of groomed to go to this school. And when I got there, I wasn't groomed to go anywhere to that school or any other. It was just more do the best you can. And I didn't have a family coming from Ivy League schools, and so the support systems weren't really in place for someone like me because they didn't expect me to be there. And so that, to me, showed me that even if we allow our students to achieve this great thing, if we don't put the support systems in place to help them along the way, and we're not really accounting for them being there, then it can be detrimental. Essentially, you can be leaving this kid up to their own devices. And so but it did show me that I could compete at any level. And at law school, when I went to Vanderbilt for law school, talking to so many classmates who went to Ivy League schools, who lived in gated communities, I didn't feel that I was in any way inferior to them. And so that really showed me that a lot of times the systems that we have in place are more outcome determinative than any sort of inherent intellectual superiority or anything else. And so that was the impact that those schools had on me.
Thank you for that. Your most proud accomplishment or time as a student and from your time with Fairfax NAACP?
Most proud accomplishment as a student and with Fairfax NAACP. I'll start with Fairfax NAACP first, because it's easier to remember. But no, with NAACP, I would say the car rally that we did. We had a lot of accomplishment there, and I was really proud of the name change and everything else. But when George Floyd was murdered, we hosted a car rally, and we had 2,500 cars show up, and that many more people. So many of these cars were packed, and it was such a moment because it was such a moment of despair in our community in so many ways, but such a moment of true community in the sense that we all came together. And at that time, the virus was rampant. We didn't know what to think or whatever, but people still came together for this cause. And it was the first step in so many meaningful changes that we're experiencing in this county, even right now. So I was incredibly proud of that moment. And first, most proud moment as a student. My most proud moment as a student, I'll take a law school because you guys are killing me and make me think back that far to high school or anything else. In law school, I mentioned this earlier, I was taking a course in my second year. A young woman came in. She was an advocate for ending sex trafficking. She'd been trying to get bills passed for a number of years on that and having a really tough time. And me and a friend who's still a friend, supports my campaign now, we took it on as an independent study. And we found hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal funding to get a study done that would bring the prosecutors, the police, and the advocates together. And that fundamentally changed the way that Tennessee dealt with sex trafficking. It's actually one of the best states in the country for how they treat people who are trafficked. They're no longer arresting underage women for prostitution or anything like that. And so it's just this meaningful change. And the only people like that were involved know I was involved, but I keep up with it from time to time. And just to see that, this started out as someone just coming to my classroom, telling me about a problem, and us saying, well, we think we can help with that. And to see what it led to is really remarkable.
That sounds super rewarding. And I think you've inspired some students to get involved. And so we have a question from a student asking, if I don't go to Lewis High School, how can I support the cause for Lewis Academy now? What would be your recommendation?
Oh, well, you would have to say that. I mean, I don't know how they could best support Lewis Academy. But this is a phenomenal thing. And I think, let's say you go to another high school, why can't you do it at your high school? Why can't you make that change there? Always feel empowered to make these things happen. But I'll leave it to you to say what's the best way to support Lewis Academy. But this is such a great idea to have students who are so engaged in public policy and bringing these high quality speakers to them. I saw some of your lists for future speakers, and this is terrific. I really think this is something that will be long lasting and hopefully inspiring to the students and others.
Since you called me up, what I would say is just because something doesn't directly impact you doesn't mean that you can't advocate for it for others. As you all know, I'm president of the TJ Alumni Action Group, but TJAG decided to partner with Lewis Academy now because we saw the difference in treatment. And we said that's not right. And so you can use your voice, even if it's not for something that benefits you or people who look like you, to help someone else. That's really what advocacy is all about. So thank you, Mr. Perryman, for calling me.
You got it, Mrs. Little. Just trying to do my part. We got to get this show on the road. We can just do this every week. We go to different parts of Virginia. I'll get elected in no time.
All right, next question. What can future civic leaders do now in high school to affect change they want and to prepare for this kind of career?
Sure. If they want to affect change, find the change makers. If you're here in Fairfax County, Fairfax NAACP has a youth council. It has membership for just general membership. Get involved with them. I would really encourage that. They're a great organization. But there's plenty of organizations that you can make the change in, and you can do it in your own school. You can create your own. And so that's what I would say to people. You can be the change. And so you feel inspired and feel encouraged to do that. That's one recommendation I would say, that you never feel that you have to wait for someone else, but there are people out there already doing the work, and I'm sure they would love your help if you're so interested.
Thank you for that. And we will end with this question. Who is your greatest inspiration?
Yeah. It's tough. It's really tough. I think Congressman Cummings is up there. He's probably one of the greatest inspirations I've had. But you know, there's so many people. There's such a strong legacy from John Lewis and everyone else. I'm inspired every day by so many of the people I meet who are just everyday people. Stories aren't known, but they're struggling and they're making it happen and they're doing the best they can. So if it's someone historical or something like that, I have to say Congressman Cummings because, you know, obviously I don't think I'd be running this campaign had I not crossed paths with him and the opportunity he gave me. So I'll say that, but I meet inspirations every day.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Sean.
Absolutely.
We could not have chosen a better speaker for our first iteration of the See It Be It speaker series. So thank you for saying yes.
Yeah,
When we
absolutely.
asked.
And can I leave the students with one thing? I know a lot of them had asked, you know, what can I do as a teenager? What can I do as a kid? You can do wonders. So much of the civil rights movement was by young people. And to put it in context, we think of that as ancient history. My mother is still alive. She lives in Manassas Park, Virginia, alive and well. And I talked to her the other day, and she grew up in South Carolina. And she grew up before the Voting Rights Act. And she was saying when she grew up, she didn't think she'd be able to vote. One generation later, her son's going to be on the ballot for lieutenant governor. That's the power of what we can do in one generation by people getting involved and standing up and saying things have to change. And we sometimes get cynical or jaded and say, you know, nothing ever changes. My mother couldn't vote and I'm going to be on the ballot. So these are the types of changes, these are the type of impact we can have on people's lives when we really step up and do the most we can. So I want you to take that to heart and know that in one generation, you could make life-altering changes and really improve the lives of others without even knowing it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being someone else's Elijah Cummings tonight. I'm going to say goodnight to you, but I'm going to ask Michelle to join us and close us out. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Makia and Sean. Thank you for an inspiring evening and the discussion, especially of advocacy and all the ways that you described it, I know made an impact on everyone here. So thank you. And thank you everybody who's here for your participation. We hope you'll spread the word. As a reminder, our next speaker will be Tony Tijerino, and he's the president and CEO of the Hispanic Heritage Foundation. That program will be on March 12th at 6 p.m. A little bit of housekeeping. As a reminder, you can reach us at info@Lewis Academy Now. And Esther reminded me to tell all of you that while we're advocating for this specific academy to be at Lewis High School, all Fairfax County students are eligible to attend the academies around the county. So just keep that in mind when you're advocating about it. Until next time, go in peace and make good trouble. Thanks a bunch.